everyone, in this module we will discuss the non-cooperation movement which was started against the Jallianwala Bagh massacre and the Rowlatt Act, along with the Khilafat movement to strengthen the unity in India. The non-cooperation movement was the first ever national movement started by Mahatma Gandhi. After his work at Champaran, Kheda and Ahmedabad, this was the movement which made him popular amongst the common people. This was a movement which transformed Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi into Mahatma Gandhi. So let's discuss the non-cooperation movement which started in 1920 and lasted till 1922. Before starting the topic, let's understand the objectives of the topic. The objectives of the topic are to understand the emergence of Gandhi, in which we will study his movement at Champaran, movement at Kheda, movement at Ahmedabad, agitation against Rowlatt Act, Jallianwala Bagh massacre and the Khilafat movement. The non-cooperation movement and its impact, Simon Commission, Nehru Report, the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, and the civil disobedience movement and its impact. And in this module, we will discuss the non-cooperation movement and its impact on the national movement. Let's discuss the new words related to the topic. One, take attempts for reforms, the reforms introduced by the British after the First World War. The Rowlatt Act, the act passed by the British government which empowered the government to arrest any person without search, warrant and trial, that means starting any case. This act was also called as the Black Act because it limits the fundamental rights of any individual. Bolshevik Revolution, the revolution by the labor class in Russia which took place in 1917. And it was due to this revolution, Russia has to withdraw itself from the First World War. Khilafat movement, the movement started by Ali brothers against the British for injustice done with the Caliph of Turkey. The Caliph of Turkey was removed by the British. After the First World War, the Muslims in India was annoyed with this policy of the British government. So against the British government, they started a movement called as Khilafat movement. Let's understand the causes of the non-cooperation movement, the background and the causes. Mahatma Gandhi led his non-violent nationalist movement Satyagraha as a protest against government repression such as the Rowlatt Act of 1919 and Jallianwala Bagh massacre of April 1919. To enlist Muslim support in his movement, Gandhi supported the Khilafat cause and became a member of the Central Khilafat Committee. Now let's discuss the causes of the non-cooperation movement in detail. Indians were not satisfied with the British economic policies. During the First World War, there was economic depression. Indian peasants were also affected by it. There was shortage of food and they had to pay high land revenue. People were forcibly taken into army in order to serve the British during First World War. Mahatma Gandhi opposed this policy of the British government and started a satyagraha against the poor economic policies of the government. Rowlatt Act was passed in 1919, which empowered the government to arrest any person without search warrant. In Amritsar, Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu were arrested. In Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar, people were gathered to protest this arrest. Here, General Dyer asked his soldiers to shoot on the unarmed people who were not knowing how to escape from the four gates of the wall. Mahatma Gandhi protested the Rowlatt Act. The Indian Muslims also started an agitation against the British government regarding the treatment of the British government with the Sultan of Turkey, who was also their religious head. The Ali brothers, named as Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, started the Khilafat movement. Mahatma Gandhi supported this movement and grabbed this opportunity to bring unity in India. He started the non-cooperation movement against the Rowlatt Act and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre and criticized the wrong deeds of General Dyer. People followed him and started leaving the jobs. Lawyers left their jobs. Schools and colleges were also boycotted. People demanded the reduction in land revenue. Even landlords and talukdars supported Mahatma Gandhi. Bonfire of British goods were common things. In Chauri Chaura, the followers of Mahatma Gandhi set the police station on fire. It was a violent activity, so he suspended this movement. Now let's discuss the causes of the non-cooperation movement. Indians offered a lot of help to the British government in its war efforts. A huge number of soldiers fought heroically for the British government and about 10,000 soldiers died in battle. But the Indian war veterans had returned from the battlefield without any compensation. They were unhappy for this ungrateful attitude of the British government. The Indian soldiers have helped a lot to the British Army in the First World War, but they did not get anything in return. They were not paid off for their services in Europe in the First World War. So they were unhappy with this attitude of the British government. So when Mahatma Gandhi started his satyagraha, they were ready to give him support. The excessive price rise due to the World War caused tremendous hardship to the people. The peasants were forced to pay extra rent. The collection of rent in cash forced the peasants to make a distress sale of the crop to collect cash for payment of rent. War demands created scarcity of agriculture products as well as of other daily necessities. There was a steady fall of living standard. There was huge economic depression in Europe after the First World War. Being a colony of England, India was also affected by this. The prices of different commodities rose to very high level. The people were finding it difficult to meet their both ends. Special problem was for the lower section of society and the peasants who have to sell their crop at lower rate so that they can survive. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 had created great impact on the Indians. The people now realized that if great autocrats like the Tsars could be overthrown, the British government could also be overthrown in this way. Moreover, the movements in Ireland and Egypt against the British rule created a new hope in the minds of the Indian leaders. There was a labor revolution in Russia under the leadership of Lenin. It was the same revolution due to which Russia has to withdraw from the First World War. It influenced the minds of the Indian leaders also, that if Russians could free themselves from the dictatorial rule of the Tsars, why could not the Indians stand against the British? The movements which were going on in Ireland and Egypt, both were the colonies of England, also inspired the Indians. Here the nationalists were starting their movements to free their countries from the British rule. It also inspired the Indians that Indians can also start a national struggle against the British rule to free themselves from the barbarous acts of the British rule. The Bolshevik Revolution took place in Russia in 1917. It was due to this revolution that Russia has to withdraw itself from the First World War. It was basically a labor revolution started under the leadership of Lenin. The laborers of Russia revolted against the Tsars who had been ruling over Russia for about 150 years. This movement also inspired the Indians that they could also stand against the mighty British rule. Another reason for starting the non-cooperation movement was the Rowlatt Act of 1919. The Rowlatt Act of 1919 was extremely repressive and anti-democratic. By the act, any person could be arrested without showing any cause and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. No pleader was allowed to plead for such a case. The Congress made a strong protest against the Rowlatt Act. In 1919, Sidney Rowlatt passed an act called as the Rowlatt Act. It was also called as the Black Act. The famous line which was linked with this act was "No Dalil, no Vakil, no appeal." This act provided the British government the power to arrest any person without search warrant. The government could put a person behind the jail as long as for 2 years, and that also without starting any case on him. It was against the personal liberties of individuals. So, Congress started a strong protest against the Rowlatt Act. And passing of such Black Act was another reason that Mahatma Gandhi started the non-cooperation movement. The Muslim discontent due to Khilafat issue was volcanic. The Khilafat leaders tried to strengthen the movement with Congress support. Gandhiji responded to the call of the Khilafatists. Thus, the background created a strong movement against the British government. After the First World War, England had dethroned the Caliph of Turkey. He was not only the Sultan of Turkey, rather he was a religious head for the Muslim people. The Indian Muslims were against this policy of British. So they started a movement against the British government called as the Khilafat movement. Mahatma Gandhi supported Muslims as he seen it as an opportunity to strengthen Hindu-Muslim unity in India. Similarly, when Mahatma Gandhi started a satyagraha against the Rowlatt Act and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Muslims also supported Mahatma Gandhi. This was grabbed by Mahatma Gandhi as an opportunity to strengthen the communal harmony in India, and so, with the support of the Muslim leaders, the Khilafat leaders, he brought the first big movement of his life called as the non-cooperation movement. Now let's understand the progress of the non-cooperation movement, or what were the activities which were done during the non-cooperation movement. On your screen you can see the main program were the bonfire of the foreign goods, including the foreign clothes. Public meetings were held at different places so that the British things could be boycotted and people could be encouraged to use the Indian goods. There were many phases of the non-cooperation movement. The first phase started from January to March 1921. It emphasized on boycott of schools, college, law courts, and promoted the use of charkha. Students took an active part, and top lawyers like C.R. Das, popularly known as Deshbandhu, Motilal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel, and others gave up their legal practice. The second phase started in April 1921. A move was taken for collection of rupees 1 crore for Tilak Swaraj Fund by enrolling 1 crore Congress members and installing 20 lakh charkhas. The first phase of the non-cooperation movement was related with boycott. It was a total boycott. Students left their schools and colleges, lawyers left the law courts, and even the British goods were boycotted and bonfire on the roads. Charkha was promoted in order to promote the local indigenous cloth, khadi. Students took an active part in this movement. The famous lawyers of those times, C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru, left their jobs as lawyers. The second phase was linked with creating a fund called as Tilak Swaraj Fund, where it was decided to raise the fund by 1 crore rupees and to install 20 lakh charkhas in order to promote khadi. The name of the fund was called as the Tilak Swaraj Fund, as Mahatma Gandhi was inspired by the policies of Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Bal Gangadhar Tilak has been often called as the forerunner of Mahatma Gandhi. All the policies which Mahatma Gandhi pursued in his life, like boycott, Swadeshi, Swaraj, all were actually started by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and that is the reason the name of the fund was Tilak Swaraj Fund. In the non-cooperation movement, foreign goods were boycotted, liquor shops were picketed, students used to stand outside the shop and don't let the customers to enter where the British goods were selling. The foreign cloth was burned. The merchants and traders that refused to trade in foreign goods and asked the Indians to set up indigenous local industries in order to promote khadi and local Indian products. The third phase of the movement, July 1921, it included the boycott of British goods, liquor shops were picketed, foreign clothes were burnt, merchant and traders refused to trade in foreign goods. The forthcoming visit of Prince Wales in November 1921 was boycotted. Charkha was popularized, khadi and jail bharo were encouraged by Congress volunteers. The fourth phase of the movement. An unexpected enthusiasm swept the country. Gandhiji now decided to start a no-tax campaign in Bardoli along with the mass message of civil disobedience movement. The third phase was characterized by total boycott. It included even the boycott of the liquor shops. The students used to stand outside the shops where the British goods were selling so that the customers cannot enter in the shops and buy the British product. That was their way to encourage the Swadeshi goods, the Indian goods, and to discourage the sale of the British goods. Congress leaders boycotted the visit of Prince Wales in India in 1921, who was coming to India for the first time. Congress leaders also started a movement called Jail Bharo in order to show the British government that even the unarmed people could fight against the British Empire. During the fourth phase of the movement, there was total enthusiasm in the country. Gandhiji started a no-tax campaign in Badoli and asked the people not to pay any sort of tax. Now let's discuss what were the reasons of the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement, or why this movement was suspended by Mahatma Gandhi. On your screen, you can see a historical mark, Chauri Chaura, where a violent activity has taken place that forced Mahatma Gandhi to end the non-cooperation movement. On 5th February 1922, at Chauri Chaura in UP, peasants set fire to the police station and 22 policemen were burned to death. Gandhiji was greatly shocked at this incident and the working committee was summoned to Badoli. At Gandhiji's insistence, the non-cooperation movement was withdrawn by the working committee on 12 February 1922. On March 10, Gandhiji was arrested and imprisoned for 6 years. On February 5, 1922, at Chaura Chauri in UP, Gorakhpur districts, the peasants set fire the police station on fire, on which 22 policemen were burnt alive. And why the peasants have done this violent activity was that the British soldiers have beaten the peasants who were unarmed and who were peacefully protesting against the British Empire. Gandhiji, as we all know, that was against the violence activities. So he suspended the non-cooperation movement. All the members of the Congress who were not willing to suspend the non-cooperation movement got agreed on insistence of Mahatma Gandhi. So on 12 February 1922, non-cooperation movement was finally ended in India. And on March 10, 1922, the same year, Mahatma Gandhi was arrested and sent to jail for 6 years as sedition against the British Empire. Now let's discuss what was the review of the non-cooperation movement according to the different leaders, or how the different leaders like Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru reacted to the suspension of the non-cooperation movement. Different scholars have reacted differently to the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, in his book An Autobiography, had stated that almost all the prominent Congress leaders and the younger people had deeply resented the suspension of the entire movement after the Chauri Chaura incident. Congress leaders like Motilal Nehru, Lajpat Rai, C.R. Das, who were in jail, also disliked the Badoli resolution. Subhash Chandra Bose stated that ending of non-cooperation movement when it was on its peak was a national calamity. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, in his famous book An Autobiography, has stated that most of the leaders of the Congress, especially the younger leaders, were against the suspension of the non-cooperation movement after the Chauri Chaura incident. The prominent leaders like Motilal Nehru, Lala Lajpat Rai, who is regarded as one of the assertive leaders, C.R. Das, who were in jail, also disliked the Badoli resolution of ending the non-cooperation movement. Subhash Chandra Bose was the one who specially criticized the ending of this movement. There had been always conflict between Mahatma Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose, as their ideologies were different. Whereas Mahatma Gandhi believed that non-violence was the only way to achieve the freedom and get the demands fulfilled from the British Empire, Subhash Chandra Bose was in favor of taking up revolutionary methods against the British Empire. Subhash Chandra Bose believed that ending a movement when it was going so successfully was like a national calamity for the country. According to him, the movement was so successful that it was not easy for the British government to curb it. The ball was in Mahatma Gandhi's court. He should have put his demand before the British government and asked them to fulfill those demands. But by ending the non-cooperation movement, he has taken a wrong step. Mahatma Gandhi always believed in non-violence. His ideology was based on satyagraha and ahimsa, whereas Subhash Chandra Bose was in favor of revolutionary methods and taking up of weapons against the British Empire. According to him, no real changes came in history can be achieved by mere discussion. So he was against the policy of suspension of non-cooperation movement when the movement was going so successfully, and even the Viceroy has written the letter to the British Queen that it was impossible for him to end the non-cooperation movement. Bipin Chandra Pal has stated this was the first ever attempt at all India level of a mass struggle, and a serious reverse at this elementary stage could have led to prolonged period of demoralization. According to Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, at this stage, that is 1922, breathing space was required to consolidate and get the strengthened for the next round of struggle, and therefore withdrawal for the time being was an inherent part of political strategy. The movement was going on for over a year, and the government was not in mood for negotiation. Chauri Chaura thus presented a unique opportunity for Gandhiji to retreat with honor. A very famous assertive leader, Bipin Chandra Pal, has remarked that this was the first time that a mass movement has taken place in India. This was the first time that the common people had participated in any movement. To end this sort of movement at a time when it was going so successfully was a serious demoralization to the enthusiasm of the people. Whereas Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who is often called as Frontier Gandhi, as he led all the movements of Mahatma Gandhi in frontier India, in the northwestern frontier part of India, praised the ending of the non-cooperation movement. According to him, the British government was not in mood for negotiation with the Congress leaders. Indian public who was unarmed could not face the British government for a longer period of time. So this was the time when a break was required to evaluate the movement and to start the next stage of the national movement. So it was a right step. It created an opportunity for Mahatma Gandhi to retreat, to step back, but with honor. Impact of the non-cooperation movement. It gave boost to the Indian textile industries. Value of foreign imports reduced in India. Many industries like liquor, tobacco, etc. ruined, and many Indian handicraftsmen and manufacturers grew in India. Khadi was promoted, and foreign textile was burnt as a point of bonfire against the British Empire. In political field, this movement gave a new dimension to the national movement. People of all walks of life, both Hindus and Muslims, took part in this movement. Common people like peasants, workers, artisans, shopkeepers, traders, professionals, and white-collar employees for the first time became an important and integral part of national movement. The economic boycott of British goods had more effect than the Swadeshi movement. The Indian textile industry had benefited owing to the boycott of British goods. The handloom cloth production went up because of popularization of charkha and khadi. The non-cooperation movement strengthened the Hindu-Muslim unity in India, especially when Mahatma Gandhi sided with the Khilafat movement. Muslims also sided with the non-cooperation movement. This was the first time that common people of India from every section of life, peasants, the workers, the artisans, the shopkeepers, and even the professionals took part in the non-cooperation movement. This was the first time that the people who were working in the British government offices also left their jobs and took part in the national struggle. The boycott of goods became more successful even than Swadeshi and boycott movement, which was started against partition of Bengal in 1905. Indian textile industry benefited a lot. More and more local and indigenous industries were set up. The local handloom cloth production went up because of popularization of khadi. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has rightly described the non-cooperation movement as a peaceful rebellion, a most civilized form of warfare and yet dangerous to the stability of the state. According to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the non-cooperation movement was the most civilized form of protest that he has ever seen, heard of, or read. It was very peaceful protest, but yet it was a threat to the stability and the honor of the British government. In this module, we have covered the following questions. What were the reasons for starting the non-cooperation movement? Why was the non-cooperation movement withdrawn? What was the program of the non-cooperation movement? And what was the impact of the non-cooperation movement on the national movement? After going through this topic, you are advised to go through these question answers. If you want to explore more on this topic, you can see a YouTube link on the screen and you can search more on this topic. With the help of this explanation and internet, you are advised to make the notes of the above topic. I hope the session had been fruitful for you. We will meet you in next session. Till then, have a nice day.